Okay. Well, as you noticed, the Torah portion today was extremely long. Aren't you glad we didn't read all of it? We would still be reading. It's one of the longer Torah portions. And to kind of scan through there and try to pick out what's the common thread that's running through all of this, because it doesn't really even seem to be related. We go from getting this tabernacle torn down to carry it across the wilderness to the trial of the sotah, or the woman accused. We get the priestly blessing, and then we end up back with the Levites, getting wagons and oxen to help them transport the tabernacle. And you think, did we just not take a really big detour to get from here back to here? But I think there was a common thread. And so when I found it, I realized that, at least in my mind, it's all connected to the wagons. There's a wagon train in the wilderness. And I know when I was little, my mom would threaten me with, I'm going to fix your wagon. And I think that's the question today. Who will fix your wagon? Because some wagons were fixed today, in one way or the other. When she said, I'm going to fix it, she did not mean I'm going to repair it. She meant, I'm going to break that wheel out of you. I'm going to break that stubborn streak out of you. So that's the question today. That's the title. Who will fix your wagon? The common thread is that through all of these things that were strung together today in the reading, is that we must manage our emotions. And so this is merely a continuation then of what we've been talking about for several weeks, ever since before Pesach, that we have an individual accountability to manage our emotions and our desires, whether we're talking about jealousy, the woman accused, whether we're talking about loving excessively. Maybe the husband has accused her unjustly. He's loving something in excess. Whether we possibly love wine too much. Could we take a Nazirite vow and keep it? Or do we become too attached to our wine? Does it become an addiction? What about ambition? When we're working together to erect the tabernacle and to break it down, are we too ambitious? Are we wanting to do someone else's job? Can we praise and worship to excess? That's a question. Most people would say, no, you can't praise or worship too much. Maybe you can. Because we saw the result of praise and worship gone bad. A Levite lost his life as a result. We can even grieve too much. These normal human desires that were given to us that make us human, any of them can be experienced to the excess. We can love too much. We can drink too much. We can work too much. We can even grieve too much to the point that it destroys our lives. We can even experience praise and worship as something that is self-serving and not God-serving. But Naso, this Torah portion, it helps us to bring our emotions and our desires back into check. It's another example of how self-discipline grows out of gratefulness and humility. Being grateful for what we have, and then assessing ourselves and understanding that we're no better and no worse than anyone else. It helps us to assess ourselves before we begin to relate into the community. It's to get that balanced personal view. How can you love your neighbor if you don't love yourself? That's a given in Scripture. It's just assume that you know how. Some of us don't even know how to love ourselves. We don't know how to balance ourselves. So how can we love and bring other people into balance if we don't first examine ourselves to see if we're in the faith? If we can't do that, then how will we ever aid or assist the community that is around us? The blessing of the Kohanim, I think, fits exactly into this. Because when you hear us say this blessing at the end of the service in Hebrew, those of you who are in the Hebrew class, if you listen closely, you can hear that it is in the singular you. Yivarechecha, you. Lecha, you. Yivarechecha, you. Singular. Not everybody. You as an individual in that blessing, what do you say? Can you hear Ratzon? Let that be so to me. You're not saying, let it be so to us. There are some responses that are like that, where we pray as a group. But in the priestly blessing, it has to come to you first as an individual before you can in turn transmit that blessing to the people around you. You have to first have that shalom in your own heart before you can bring shalom into the lives of other people. Your own heart, mind, and body have to be at peace before you can bring the body of Messiah into peace. Now, part of the blessing is the Lord make his face shine upon you. And in the Pirkei Avot, which is a tractate of the Talmud, we understand that we are to greet every man with a pleasant expression of countenance. Why are we commanded to do that in the rabbinic writings? Because this is a means of carrying out the priestly blessing. We know that one of the commandments is for us to emulate, to copy the behavior of our Elohim, right? We are to be like him. That's what he says for us to do. So if he shines his face upon us, then what are we obligated to do to other people? Shine. That's what we're asked to do. That's why it says, greet every man with a pleasant expression of countenance. And there's 3 parts to this statement. The countenance, it says turn your face toward them. If you're going to speak with someone, if you're going to communicate and have a conversation, look at them. Don't turn your face away from someone when they're trying to talk to you. You don't communicate people by turning your face away. You communicate by looking and holding that expression. Don't ever greet anyone with the side of your face. It's rude, and you will not have communication. Next is the expression. The expression on your face should not be one of boredom. Or, I really have a lot of things to do, could you hurry up? Your expression should be pleasant. It should be friendly. You know what Albert Einstein said when he was asked? He said, if they find these aliens in outer space, what would you ask them? He said, well, I would ask them if they're friendly. Okay, one of the smartest men that's ever lived. And what he wants to know, if there's other people out there or other beings out there, are they friendly? That's all we all want to know. When we walk up to someone, I want to know, are you friendly? So turn a friendly face to your fellow man. And the final one is pleasant. Be pleasant. Be interested and be pleasant. So, if he deals for us measure for measure, and that's what we want him, is we want his face to turn toward us. If we want him to be interested in us, and we want him to have a pleasant expression on his face when he turns his face toward us, then how should we look at other people? If you're not looking at other people that way, then I'm not sure how you can expect your Father in heaven to do that for you. You will get measure for measure. That's what he says. A pleasant countenance is just as contagious as these emotional viruses we spread around. When you walk in with that look on your face, and everybody in the room goes, ooh, what happened? What have you done? You just spread an emotional virus. But what if you walk in and you have a pleasant expression on your face, like you're glad to be there? I've walked into rooms at work before because my shift is later than everyone else's. I can come in at their lunchtime, and by lunchtime they're all sitting around. And I'll just walk in with a happy face because nothing bad's happened yet. But you know what? If you pick at them a little bit and talk to them a little bit and act interested and keep that countenance on your face, you can make a difference in the room. 2 or 3 people will respond. Some of them you're never going to pull them out of their despondency. They love it. It gives them power or something. I don't know what their deal is. But most people will respond to a smile. Even in the grocery store, you're walking past somebody, at some point your eyes are going to meet when you go down that aisle. What if, instead of avoiding your eyes, so you don't have to see them or talk to them or acknowledge them, you just smile as you pass. How you doing? Hi. That's it. But it will make a difference in the rest of their shopping experience. You're doing Kroger a favor. They should pay us for smiles. They're going to return to places that are pleasant. They're going to return to people who are pleasant. It's difficult, however, to be interested in people and to show a pleasant expression to people when we are despondent, when we are truly sad, when we are truly sorrowful or angry, when we're seething inside. It doesn't matter if you paste that smile on. Your spirit is going to radiate the tension and the sorrow, and people are going to pick up on it. So it needs to be more than just the pasting over the despondency. We need to learn how to control our sorrow. And this portion gives us several illustrations that tell us what kinds of things should be brought into balance, because we don't want the out-of-balance emotions to characterize us. We are all sad sometimes. We all grieve sometimes. We have all this range of human emotion that we are to experience. We're all angry sometimes. But if the people who know us well, and even the people who don't know us that well, if someone were to come up to them and ask them about you and said, give me one word that describes that person, do you want words like sad, depressed, angry, resentful? What kind of word would people describe you as? If they're describing you with these negative emotions, maybe you're driven, maybe you're tense, maybe that's what you portray to other people. Maybe you just checked out. If they had to describe you, what emotional word would they use? If it's one of the negative words, then we need to do some work on balancing our emotions, because that's how they perceive us. And we don't want the world to perceive us at our extremes. It may be that a normal cycle of human emotion has become an extreme, that it's come out of balance. And if that's what they're thinking, that's what's happened. But I think with any out-of-balance emotion, one word can really get down to the core of why it happens. And that word is stewardship. If you look at Adam and Eve, when they moved away from stewardship over the garden, and they moved into ownership, we want to be like God. We want His attributes. We want to be wise like Him. We want more control. And then this was passed on to a son that they named Cain. Cain. Cain, the root of that means to possess, to acquire. You heard it in the first song that was played, Zealous Over Zion. It means kana is the word that it comes from, to acquire, to possess, to want to control. So in the issue with Cain and with Abel, what happened? Abel understood that he was merely a steward of the things that Elohim had given him. But Cain moved from stewardship to ownership. I want to control it all. I want the best for myself. I will simply give something, that's not the best. I will not give the choicest fruits. I will keep those, I will own those for me. We do the same thing. When we move in our minds from stewardship to ownership, no matter what it is, then we're going to start experiencing out-of-balance emotions, and especially things like envy and jealousy and resentment. So what does this have to do with fixing our wagons? Well, the wagons were given to the Levites to move the Mishkan structure. The heavier parts of the Mishkan had to be loaded into wagons that were pulled by oxen. If you look at the first mention of wagons in Scripture, it goes back to when Joseph sent Pharaoh's wagons back to the Promised Land to fetch the wives and the children of his brothers and bring them to Egypt to protect them and feed them during the famine. That's the first mention. And so in that context, the wagons were something that protected something that was very precious to us. The wives and the children of the tribes of Israel were protected and transported to safety in those wagons. But over time, something happened. They began to grow accustomed to the good life down in Egypt. They began to acquire more and more sheep, more and more goods, and they got attached to that more and more. They moved from stewardship of a promise into ownership of much flocks. They lost the vision. So in time, those wagons had become vehicles not of salvation and safety and refuge, but they had become vehicles of slavery. Anything good can become something bad when we lose our perspective, when we move from stewardship to ownership. That's the potential for good to become bad through disobedience and bad attitudes. Now, in our portion, 2 of the Levite families were allotted wagons to assist them in carrying the heavy parts. But the Kohatites, they were not to use wagons because they carried the holiest articles of the tabernacle, the Aron Kodesh, the Holy Ark. It says that was never to be loaded on a wagon. It was to be borne on the shoulders of that family, carried on the shoulders. And that's where it had to be balanced. It was living. Do you see that, how it was attached to living things? Whereas when you load an article onto a wagon, you're loading it really onto an inanimate object pulled by a beast. And beasts, we know, can sometimes represent our emotions and our desires because they have them too. They just don't necessarily know how to control them the same way that we do. Sometimes they're better at it than we are. But the word for shoulder that's used, where we talk about carrying the Holy Ark, is katef. And it's interesting that up until we get until the tabernacle in the wilderness, a different word is used. It's shechem. But once we get into the holy things and we start getting instructions about the ephod that the high priest wears, it says on his shoulders, on his katef, he's going to have one onyx stone here and one here. On this shoulder, on this katef, are the names inscribed of the 6 tribes of Israel, and on this side are the other 6. So the 12 tribes are carried in perfect balance on the shoulders of the high priest. Each stone engraved with 6. So that tells you that the high priest knows how to carry Israel in perfect balance. He knows how to carry us in a balanced way. But if you think about it, when we're talking about the Holy Ark, it would take at least 4 Levites to carry it. Because of the width and so forth, you're looking at least 4 men. And with the gold overlay, I'm betting that probably more than 4 would have to put their shoulder under that to carry it for any length of time. So at least 4 Levites are required to transport a holy article in balance. So in a sense, what the Levites were carrying were the skin and bones of the tabernacle. When they carried it in the wagons, they were taking things like curtains and lumber and sockets and hooks and so forth. And what they were carrying is equivalent to the veils of our flesh. You know, our flesh and bone structure, that part of us was being carried in wagons. And a wagon can be broken and need fixing just like our bodies can. These old physical bodies, this flesh and bone, it breaks down. But the things of the Spirit depend upon our personal self-discipline. It depends upon our ability to balance our emotions and our desires. Because it is only when you see emotions and desires out of balance that you ever see the Holy Ark in a wagon. Do you realize that? The only times in Scripture the Holy Ark was put in a wagon was when Israel was in disobedience, when those emotions and those desires were out of control. One example, and it's a funny story to read because we talk about, the Philistines had captured the Holy Ark and they stuck it in there, and then their God kept falling down. And that's kind of a funny little story. And then they all started getting hemorrhoids. And they said, we got to get rid of this ark. And so they figured out how to get rid of the ark. They yoked these young cows to a wagon, loaded the Holy Ark on it, and said, get gone, and just let them go. And they eventually wandered back down to Israel. But once the Levites gained control of the ark, and the wagons, what they did is they removed the Holy Ark from the wagon where it was not supposed to be. They smashed up the wagon, burned the wood, and then slaughtered the cows and sacrificed them on the wood. An ark does not belong in a wagon. It has to be carried on the shoulders. The second example was in the Haftorah that we read. When King David brings the ark up to Jerusalem, man, that sounds like a huge party. And we've talked about this before, the threshing floor of Nachon. They are singing, they are dancing, they're playing instruments. There's much rejoicing and celebration because the Aron Kodesh is going to Yerushalayim. It's going home again. But we see that when they reach a place called the threshing floor of Nachon, the oxen stumbles. And this Levite, Uzzah, he reaches out to steady the ark. That's a good thing, right? You don't want the ark to fall on the ground. But it says that Adonai broke out against him, and he died. He died before the Lord. Why? Well, Melech David, he says he meditates on the Torah day and night, right? How did he miss this portion? Because this is what he missed. But if he meditated on it day and night, it tells me that he knew what it said, and he still made a conscious choice that I know better than Elohim where this ark goes, and I'm going to make this fine wagon. I'm going to dress it up. We're going to put the ark on there. We're going to have a party. We're going to have praise. We're going to have worship and tambourines. And we're just going to dance so hard and sing so loud that he won't even notice we're doing the wrong thing. But he noticed. The party lasted a while. But when you reach the threshing floor, Nachon means true. What is correct? What is right? Praise and worship can be carried on, but it will not pass the truth test. You can go so far on praise and worship with disobedience. But once you reach that threshing floor, once you have come to the place where you have found truth, and you know you've disobeyed it, you will go no further. You will die before the Lord. That is exactly what happened. They did what they did with knowledge. Don't tell me King David and a Levite didn't know this Torah portion. They just took it upon themselves to change the rules. Or say, if I dance hard enough, it won't matter. If I sing loud enough, it won't matter. If I get enough people involved with me, it won't matter. It does matter. You can only go so far. The threshing floor of truth. It was supposed to be carried on the shoulders of the Kohathites. So, what did the place come to be called? Peretz Uzzah. And that means the place where Uzzah, the Levite, was broken. He broke there. He died. He died before the Lord. And we know that David was very angry. Sometimes, even though we know we were disobedient, we think that we have been punished way too harshly. And we can actually get mad at him because of the correction. When what we need to do is go home and reflect on, I brought this on myself and I affected other people. I need to repent and then try again out of a spirit of obedience instead of disobedience. So, although Uzzah was acting under the pretense of praise and worship, it was not accepted. His body was broken. This is the place where he was broken. Peretz can also mean that it's invalidated. It can mean broken, or it can mean that it's invalidated. It's not good. He was invalidated in a very public way because we're still reading about it. His mistakes are still remembered. Sometimes we live to correct our mistakes and live on. Sometimes we die in our mistakes and people remember us for all the wrong reasons. Don't be what's his name that tried to help the ark. It might be that our praise and worship even needs to come into balance, because otherwise it might be our wagon that needs some fixing. Our physical bodies can die before the Lord. We can see that. So wagons represent to us managing our flesh and blood for the things of the Spirit. You have to manage this thing. Flesh and blood, we know, cannot inherit the kingdom of heaven, right? But the flesh and blood person can. Wasn't Adam created as flesh? And when he saw his wife, didn't he say, flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone? We are flesh and bone. Hello. That's not your problem. Your problem is allowing your flesh and your blood to be controlled by a carnal mind. By having out of control, unmanaged emotions and desires. The problem is undisciplined flesh. We have to acknowledge that Yeshua came in the flesh, or we have the spirit of the anti-Messiah, right? He came in the flesh, but he disciplined his flesh. Sometimes he did what he did not want to do. But he was able to say, let this cup pass from me, nevertheless, not my will but thine be done. How many times do we say, nevertheless, my will but not thine be done? That's the difference between stewardship and ownership. It's not your flesh that's going to lead you astray. It's a carnal mind controlling your flesh. It wants to claim ownership of the earth instead of stewardship. You don't own anything here. No one does. We are only stewards. You see, Melech David, he did not own that ark. It belonged to all Israel. It was not his to mismanage. He was the steward of it. He was responsible for it. The Levites were responsible to know better. And they did not act according to what they knew. It was not David's authority to change the rules. It was his authority to care for that ark according to the instructions. When we take ownership instead of stewardship, we're going to bring forth death. Something will be broken and we will be invalidated in front of a lot of people. Israel descended into Egypt with wagons. They gave occasion to the flesh and stayed there. Their holdings increased. That's the spirit of Cain, the spirit of Cain, to acquire for oneself without regard to spiritual health. We all do it at times. Our flesh can bring pleasure untold. It feels good. That praise and worship must have felt wonderful till they reach the truth. Once you encounter the truth, it changes things. We have to be managed by a spirit of the disciplines, or we also will be broken wagons of self-worship and idolatry. A wagon or a cart in Hebrew is agalah. Agalah. In it you can hear the root and hear where the word comes from. Egel. It's a calf. Calves, oxen pull the cart, get it? The connection. Agalah, egel. Calf worship in the wilderness, it was merely self-worship. It was merely them getting what they wanted. The people rose up to dance, to play, to eat, to indulge in illicit sexual activity. And so they bowed their knees to their own desires. That's all that calf was. They were worshiping their own desires. They were giving credence. They were validating themselves. But the Father in heaven did not validate it. He invalidated it. They even took their gold jewelry and invested it into the project so they could make sure that they got their own way. And we do that sometimes. We invest money in projects and things so we can be sure we get our own way. In our cases, maybe it's not illicit sex that we indulge in. Maybe it's something else. It could be alcohol. It could be controlling others with our emotions. Have you ever known somebody that could actually control other people with their emotions? You were so scared of them going off that everybody just walked on tiptoe around them? We all know when we come in what kind of mood the supervisor's in, because you can look at the other people in the department and know what kind of mood she's in. Lord help me if she ever watches this. Because we walk in, we go, how is it? And somebody will say, okay, you go to your office and you stay out of sight and you stay out of mind. You walk on eggshells because this person is going to blow up. and you just don't want to be in the way when it all blows. It could be other things. It could be feeding resentments. It could be feeding new food into an old resentment. It might be gossip. It could be any number of destructive thinking habits that break your wagon down, because this does have a physiological effect on you. It lasts for a long time. You know, if you've always said to yourself, why do I keep doing this? And you don't want to do it, I think you've just identified a broken wagon and a golden calf. It's something that does need to be broken down. It needs to be controlled. Today is the day to obey Adonai. Today is the day to remove the holy ark of the Torah from the wagon of undisciplined flesh and to put it on your shoulders. It's time to get tough. It's time to get strong. And you're going to need help. You can't carry it alone. One person cannot carry the ark. It takes at least 4 to get up under that load. I want you to put this thing in balance on your shoulders. And it's going to take your personal initiative to do it. So what you need to find is 3 other worthy people to help you carry the ark of the Torah in your life. You need a multitude of counsel, of wise counsel in your life to keep you in balance. Because if it's just you, you're going to be dragging it on the ground, I guarantee you. You can't carry that by yourself. And if you're not listening to other people, you're going to walk into places that you shouldn't walk. You're going to have to trust the people up front to tell you where you're going. Or you're going to have to trust the people behind you to tell you when they can see something that you can't. You have to trust other people. And if you think, I can't trust 3 other people with my heart, then what are you telling me? You're telling me you still have your ark in a wagon. It's still there. It only takes one person to manage a load in a wagon. All you got to do is follow the ox and poke it a few times. But have any of you ever seen a runaway horse? Well, a runaway cow I don't think would be a whole lot different. It's kind of scary, especially if a person's on board. But when they get out of control, they are being driven by an instinct, by a desire to get away. Something has made them afraid. Or they want that barn so bad, they don't care what you do to them. Nothing's going to turn them till they get there. You don't get in their way. They'll run straight over you. That's what your emotions and your desires are. They're these oxen. You want to put the holy ark in a cart, in a wagon, and then trust it to your emotions? I don't trust my emotions that much because they're up and they're down. They're up and they're down. They get headstrong sometimes. They get afraid sometimes. That's not where I want the ark of the Torah, being pulled here and there by my emotions and my desires. I need the Torah on my shoulder. I need it to become a part of me. It's a living thing. Those calves of your own desire, they're going to stumble in the way. It's just a matter of time. Where will they stumble? They will stumble onto truth. And how do we react when we stumble onto truth? If we have been erring unknowingly, then we know to straighten up, right? But if we have been erring with full knowledge, there's 2 kinds of disobedience. There's ignorance, I didn't know better, and the other kind, I knew better and I did it anyway. And you punish them differently, don't you? Do you think Adonai would have punished Uzzah if he didn't know any better? I don't think so. He gave him the instructions. I believe he absolutely knew better. But because times have changed, that was then in the wilderness, this is now. We've got King David, and if he says it's okay, it must be. If a human tells you it's okay and Torah tells you it's not, believe the Torah. Don't get involved. Just say, David, you're going to have to recruit somebody else. I'm not getting close to that wagon. We'll find some Kohathites and we'll put it on their shoulders, but I don't want to get close when it breaks out because this is willful disobedience and we will die before the Lord. That's what happens when your emotions and your desires take over. The words of Torah can be death to you if you profess to submit to the Torah. But the world sees you in envy and gossip and jealousy, resentment, chronic fatigue, sexual sin, or any form of rebellion against the Torah. Then the words of the Torah have become death to you, just like the bitter waters in the trial. If she were guilty, she would die. If you sin willingly and rebelliously, you will die when you know better. So, you can keep trusting in your own little wagons of emotions and desires, or you can start to trust some other people to help you carry it on your shoulders where it belongs. And that's what the family of faith is for. It's to help you find balanced people who will help you find your own balance. And it's only when you trust them, when you take that risk and you trust them and you extend that faith, when you choose life, that you can walk in this Torah. And then remember what happens as the Levites walk into the Yarden River. What happened? The waters just parted in front of them. You can expect a miracle when you learn to get it off the wagon and right up here. When you can get yourself in balance. If you don't trust the people of this congregation to do you good, then you will never trust your Father in heaven. It won't happen. You can, every day of your life, choose to load it on the wagon, or you can choose to trust the tzaddikim, the saints, the people that have been appointed to walk with you. Every day of your life, you can direct that wagon in carnal flesh without discipline, or you can manage daily your desires. Let's look at the order of things and the portion. The first portion, of course, assigned to the Levites their service of transporting the tabernacle in the wilderness. So, to prevent jealousy and confusion, Adonai gives very specific instructions in this Torah portion. He goes so far as to say, okay, take the men's names and put them on the articles. So-and-so carries this. So-and-so carries this. And even then, we know that disagreements or confusion might still arise, even though we put people's names on things so that they know what to do. He says, in that case, Itamar is going to manage any disputes. Anything that arises up, anything that crops up, he's the manager. He oversees it. He's going to have the final word in the dispute. It's like a policy. We all deal with policies in some way. All a policy is an answer worked out in advance of an anticipated problem. You don't think Adonai knew they would start fighting over the articles of the tabernacle and who got to carry what and when and where and how? Of course they would. They're human. They're going to disagree over it. You know, a lot of people today think that too much organization stifles creativity and freedom, but the opposite is true. The more you know what you're doing, the better the plan is, the more freedom you have within that boundary, because everybody knows what they're doing. There's no confusion. In the house of Adonai, just like Jimmy told you last week, everything has its place. Everybody has a part and a place, and you have to know where that is. And your freedom is found working within that boundary of wherever your position is. Poor old Itamar, he had a hard job. I don't envy him at all. That must have been a mess because they had never done this before. It was something brand new. They had a whole tabernacle. They were going to have to learn how to set this thing up, get it running, and then at the spur of the moment they would have to tear the thing back down, pack it up, load it up, and start moving it across the wilderness. That's no easy task. It was very complicated. There would be issues. You know, I can see that in us. You just let us rent another facility for a festival and sit back and watch the disagreements and the confusion that occurs over who does what when. It's unbelievable. Some of the stuff we argue over. They had the same problem. They didn't know what they were doing either. It took practice. How many times did they have to put that tent up in the wilderness and take it down till they got it right? Probably close to 40 years, I would say. because I don't know that we necessarily get better at it. Every Shabbat when we come up here, we are erecting the tabernacle all over again. And how well we put it together and erect it and cooperate with one another is going to determine how free the Holy Spirit is to work in here. Yes. If we're fighting over what one another does, do you think he feels welcome? No. Or have we put it in a wagon? Have we started owning it instead of being stewards of it? None of this belongs to any of us. This bema belongs to all of us. A few of us were involved in the selecting of it. Other people constructed it. Other people will do different things to it to decorate it and prepare it. But we're all cooperating. It doesn't belong to any one person. It's how we cooperate to get this tent up and get it broken back down. And we have to do it over and over and over and over. Practice makes perfect. We got to keep doing it over and over until we get it right. I hope it doesn't take 40 years. But if it does, that's okay. I'm not going to quit trudging. All right? Let's just hope we don't break anything in the process. So, when Adonai decides to set a manager over something, we're expected to go ahead and listen to him. Because we're all going to have different ideas about how it might be done. And I think the thing to do for us is if someone has been clearly appointed over a task, listen to them. We can't anticipate every problem that might come up, but we can anticipate that we will be called to cooperate and not put things in wagons that don't belong there. If it goes on the shoulder, that's where we're going to put it. See, we don't even own the Moedim. When we go off to celebrate a festival at Sukkot, or we go somewhere for Pesach, we don't own that festival. It is not ours. We are stewards of that festival, and there will be an accounting. As much as we know about that festival, we are expected to obey. And when we don't obey it, and he presses us to the wall and says, this is truth, how well did you do? Have mercy on us. Or we would die before the Lord for our disobedience. We are stewards when we over-identify ourselves with a job, with a task, with a territory, or even with people. Then we have the spirit of Cain. We are trying to acquire this thing for ourselves instead of simply realizing we're only stewards of it. It's not ours. So even if we think our way is better, turn to the one that's been appointed over that service. Turn a cheerful countenance toward the one that's appointed over that service and say, how do you want me to do this? Please settle this dispute. He thinks it should be done this way. He thinks it should be done that way. The Torah is not clear. All right, Itamar, tell us what to do. And then keep the countenance cheerful, because probably in your mind, your idea or your way of doing things is better than his. And so is the other guy. He thinks his way is better. But you can't all three do it differently. You're going to have to cooperate. We have to do this at our festivals. If someone has been clearly appointed over something, just say, okay, I will. I will put my bright idea on the back burner for next year. Even bright ideas have to be disciplined. It doesn't matter how brilliant you are. You have to even discipline those things. Assist those who are assigned to a task. Discipline yourself to do it cheerfully, and you'll be pleasantly surprised at how much smoother things go. But even bright ideas in your personal life, much less in a congregation. It doesn't mean you can't have bright ideas, but if all you ever do is follow the bright idea every time it pops a light bulb on, you will never go anywhere. You will never finish anything. You will have a life filled with unfinished projects and business because you didn't know how to pack it up, load it up, and carry it to the next spot. Even our insights and our bright ideas sometimes aren't for this moment. They have to be packed up, carefully put away, loaded on a wagon, carried a few miles down the road, and when you unpack it, maybe that's the time for that bright idea to be implemented. But if we don't do that, if we just follow bright ideas here and there, and there's no organization, then we've got chaos. Pack your goals for travel. Just don't move impulsively from project to project. The Father has placed priests in our lives and Levites in our lives that will assist us in bringing our wonderful ideas and our projects into balance, to help us understand our personal service and our calling in relation to the body of Messiah. And we should heed those voices. It goes back to trust. You will have to trust them. Then we come to the trial of jealousy, the trial of the sotah, the woman accused. And it's interesting because it deals with two sides of the coin here. It says if a spirit of jealousy comes over him and he's jealous of his wife when she has defiled herself, or if a spirit of jealousy comes over him and he is jealous of his wife when she has not defiled herself. That's two kinds of jealousy. And if we think jealousy is a bad thing, it's not. There is such a thing as good jealousy. At least when you look at the original language. We always think of jealousy as bad. But how many times in Scripture, or at least in the Tanakh, does it say that Adonai is a jealous God? Is that a bad thing, that he's jealous? It's a good thing. And it says it explicitly 13 times. Indirectly more than 13. He says, I am a jealous God. Look out. If you're mine, you're mine. And it's my job to protect you. The root word of jealousy is kana. Remember where we got the name Cain or Cain. But it's the same word used for zealous. Zeal for his house has consumed me, right? Is that a bad thing or a good thing? That's a good thing. But what if we let jealousy, which is protectiveness over what we're responsible for, I like for my husband to be somewhat jealous for me because he can protect me. He guards my boundaries for me. He's watching for me. You know, we're jealous over our property. We don't want people coming in and taking things out of our house. We jealously guard what God has given to us as stewards. That's good jealousy. Zealous is the same thing. The Levites were zealous. And they went in and they slew some of their brethren who were overtaken in sin. They were having zeal for the house. Yeshua had zeal for his Father's house. That's a good thing. But even zeal without knowledge. Remember what they said? They had zeal but not according to knowledge. Zeal requires knowledge, or you're going to tear some stuff up. You're going to be like a bull in a china shop. Zeal according to knowledge. This will help you when you think of zeal and jealousy. The undisciplined emotion of zeal, not the good kind, the bad kind. The undisciplined emotion of zeal as for another's property is equal to envy. If you're zealous for it, but it's not yours to have, then you envy that thing. You want that thing. You become zealous for it, but it's not yours to have. If it's zeal for your own property, what belongs to you, but it's overdone, then it becomes equal to jealousy in a bad sense. This is my wife. Nobody better touch her. That can be a good thing, or it can be overdone. It can be undisciplined. If it motivates you to protect what's yours in a healthy way, it's a good thing. Even when you have a jealous spirit, when you have evil spirits that assault you, then you should be jealous and zealous. You should want to protect your spirit from these things that are trying to come in and assault. But it has to be informed by the knowledge of the Torah, because zeal for the house of Adonai brings forth death to those who threaten the bride of Mashiach. Be careful with your sword. Be careful what you cut. And jealousy, it can exist whether the facts are present to support it or not. Sometimes it's just a suspicion that says this spirit's going to come over him. Why does he have this thing come over him? Well, it might be that he has some facts that have provoked him. Maybe he was at work and his buddy said, hey, I saw your wife at hotel whatever with old so-and-so last Saturday night. Where were you? Uh-oh. That would be jealous with the facts. But what if a man accuses his wife unjustly? She has been perfectly faithful. And he starts to accuse her. The Spirit comes over him. What is that? That's delusional jealousy. It is not based on fact. And we've all experienced some kind of jealousy in our lives. When we're little kids, we're jealous over our toys and things like that. But we've all experienced how destructive jealousy can be. When we think we have something and someone else is trying to take that away from us. What is that? Is it real? Is the threat real? Or is it imagined? Someone is threatening my relationship. Is it real? Is it a real threat? Or is it all in my head? That's what the trial of Sotah exists to clear up. You know, a nationwide survey of marriage counselors who are doing therapy with couples say that 1/3 of all couples in counseling are dealing with jealousy. You know where that 1/3 of all those couples are? They're going to church. They're going to services. They're going somewhere. So I'm willing to bet that 1/3 of us have a problem to some degree with jealousy. Whether it's real, we have a reason to be jealous and protective, or whether it's delusional, we have no reason to feel the way that we feel. It's important to differentiate between what a normal jealousy is and a delusional jealousy is. The evil root of delusional jealousy is found down here in the heart of the accuser. And many times, not all the time, someone, a husband, or it could be a wife, who is accusing the other spouse of unfaithfulness, it's what they're doing. Have you ever noticed the enemy always accuses you of what he's doing? And the other person, that person who's doing that thing, will accuse you of being that? That's where that comes from sometimes. In some cases, the unfaithful husband will accuse the wife of being unfaithful because if he can bring that question out there, then he can feel better about what he's doing. But something in us makes us experience jealousy the way that we do. And the reason for this is we have issues from our childhood. There's still unfinished business back there. And that's really the root of all this junk we've been talking about. Unfinished conflicts, unresolved things from our childhood. And when we're adults, we experience these things as vulnerabilities, insecurities, and fears. It's not pretty. But when we find our spouse and we fall in love, and then we feel like that love is reciprocated, that's what your spouse is for. Your spouse was given to you to help you deal with all those issues from your childhood. Now you can cooperate with your spouse and work those things through. Or you cannot be cooperative, and they will not help you one bit. You'll be just as lost as you were when you found them. And then once the new wears off, once that romantic thing is gone, where are you? If we're married or we're in a relationship, and we trust this person has been the most intimate with us as anybody that's ever lived. We have trusted them with our insecurities, our vulnerabilities, our fears, and they're helping us work through all these things from our past. They know our deepest thoughts and insecurities. And when we believe that they're out there fulfilling that role in someone else's life, you know what that tells us? There's no hope for me ever. If this person I let completely inside of me is going to betray me like this, there's no hope for me. How does that make you feel? If you have no hope, it makes you feel awful. That's why it's important to bring it out in the open. Let's get this thing cleared up. Is it real or is it imagined? Because we need to feel whole and we need to feel safe with our spouse. We don't need to feel as though that is threatened. This emotion is so powerful. Adonai says, find out the truth. Find out what is nachon. Is it correct? Is it true? Or is it lo nachon? It's not right. Because yes, there are severe consequences for betraying a marriage covenant. But if the husband is merely acting on old insecurities, all he's doing is worshiping the calf of his old unmanaged emotions. He's still worshiping himself. He's going to be forced to look at the real source of his jealousy when she's found innocent. And the real source is himself, not her. It's not her behavior, it's his. It's his problem. He has the spirit of Cain because he has ceased to see his wife as his partner, as a gift over whom God has made him a steward, and he has now become the owner and possessor. That's how you can tell the difference. If he now possesses you, he will be jealous over you in a bad way. He will not be your steward and care for you because he realizes you're just on loan from the Father, and how he presents you back to the Father will reflect then on his accountability. So when we borrow a tool from somebody, don't we take extra care of it? Or if we borrow someone's car, don't we take extra care not to harm it? And then to present it back to them in as good or better shape as when we borrowed it? That's how we should treat our spouses. They're only on loan. We are only the stewards, and when we present them back to the Father, they should be in better shape than when you found them. You are there to help them. As we move into the core of our jealousies, we're going to discover ungrounded expectations. Your expectations sometimes were way too high or way too out of balance. We're going to find envy. We're going to find loss of self-esteem. We're going to find out we're a bunch of babies, that we have infantile fears and insecurities, and these are not nice discoveries about ourselves. It doesn't feel good to look inside and see those things, but it takes the trial to bring them out. So, both parties are examined in this trial. Is it true? Is it not true? These undisciplined emotions have to be brought before the priest and brought back into balance, into discipline. But it's only in acknowledging these old securities in a public way that this husband can begin to manage them. Otherwise, there's no reason. If he denies he has the problem, he will never fix a problem he won't admit he has. But if all of a sudden she's pregnant, doesn't he look like a fool? Because the Father himself has done a mystical thing in her body and brought forth life in her body, vindicated her completely, and said, you're a fool for not trusting her. What's wrong with you? Deal with it. Get it out in the open. Deal with it and move on. Quit being a baby. Sometimes we can have other excesses. We can have excessive compassion because we see that up to that point they didn't want to put the lepers out of the camp. They didn't want the unclean people out of the camp. They liked them close at hand because it was people they were close to. Would you want to put your family member out of a camp? You're going to be the one to walk them out. So you can't come back in here till you get it cleaned up. Excessive compassion. Sometimes we need to cut people off so that God can deal with them. Bring that back into balance. For the Nazir, it was the love of wine. Can you do without wine for this period of time? Or are you addicted? Do you have a problem with alcoholism? He's also told to manage his grief. Don't even go around a corpse. Because some people can get so consumed with grief it destroys their life. Now other people can use it as a springboard to do wonderful things. But other people, their grief destroys them. Another area was the hair, which we know is a source of vanity. That stuff was going to be shaved off and burned up. There it goes. If you were too attached to your appearance, that can be done away with. We can desire all sorts of things too much. All sorts of things can come out of balance. And the desire for it breaks the bonds of discipline. We start putting things in the wagon that don't go there. In Hebrew, the Nazarite's hair is called his crown. A crown represents authority. Are we too controlling of others? Do we misuse the authority, our ability to control others? Are we too caught up in enforcing our own desires upon others? Adonai says, shave it off. Get rid of it. Quit controlling other people. Learn that you walk with people, not over them. We are stewards. We are not owners. You only lease the territory. You need to quit beating each other up, because when you do it, you beat up the Son, and the Father will not be pleased. It's only a lease. Don't get too attached to it. How about depression and grief? Adonai says, don't go near the corpse. Don't go to the funeral. Because even the emotion of grief can and should be managed. Remember me talking about don't hang around the cemetery for weeks on end? Bury them. walk around a little bit, grieve, and then leave the cemetery. You're not supposed to live in a dead place. Move on. Psalm 43 says, "Why are you in despair, O my soul? And why are you disturbed within me?" That's what you have to ask. When your emotions are out of control, be like the psalmist. Soul, why are you cast down? And be honest with the answer. We don't like to be honest with ourselves. But this asks, why are you in despair, O my soul? Why are you depressed? Why are you angry? Why are you upset? Why are you disturbed? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, the help of my countenance. My friendly face is in God. That's where it is. And that is the answer to your unmanaged emotions. Get to the heart of it. Ask yourself why you're really cast down. Ask yourself why you're really in chaos. Why is your praise turned back to sorrow time after time after time? Look for those emotions that are a result of overcaring, overdoing, evidence that you have moved from stewardship into ownership, and maybe you didn't even realize that you had. But now that you reach the threshing floor of truth, you have to ask, why am I cast down? What's wrong with me? Why am I out of balance? You then have to return that ownership back to Adonai and once again accept stewardship instead. You will have to praise him and regain control of your emotions, and then it will be reflected in your countenance. King David, he was not exempt from spiritual discipline, and neither are we. We have to be prepared. Yes, his countenance became angry at the discipline, but he did reflect. He did pull apart and say, so, what have we done? We've made an error. We've got to go back to the Torah, and we've got to do it right this time. But when he came back, the praise and the worship and the song and the dance and all the wonderful things associated with moving the ark, it was better than before. The praise and worship was based and founded upon the truth and the knowledge of the Torah. That's what we want, a countenance that radiates from the advantage of truth, not just emotion. In the trial of the Sotah, the sacred name was written on a parchment and dissolved in water. And that's what we have to remember. The name of heaven will either be your vindication or it will bring forth your death. The Torah is that way. It will be your vindication or it will be your death. You will die before the Lord. If you were guilty, then you have the wasting death, and it starts in the reproductive area. If your fruit is not coming forth, you might have failed a trial. You might have failed a test, the test of your faithfulness. We have to ask ourselves, is my zeal producing life or death? Yes, I am zealous for this thing. But is the result of it death? Or is the result of it life? Do I behave as though I possess instead of partner? Do the tests make me more or less productive? If you're getting a worse and worse attitude through every test that you have, guess what? You're failing every one. Because he said if you pass it, if you've been faithful, then you'll bring forth a lot of fruit. You will become productive again. The test should bring forth more fruit. The Torah without a proper mixture of faith and faithful actions will bring forth death. You have to believe that this trial and test that you're going through is for the sake of the future, and the future is better than today. Otherwise, there's no reason for you to go through it. Yes. If you don't think tomorrow and the next day and the next day are going to be better, what's the point? Yes. Don't go through the trial. Quit caring. Just don't care. But if you have faith, if you believe that tomorrow is better, discipline your emotions. Suffer the trial today, because whether she was guilty or whether she was innocent, don't you know she was absolutely humiliated? In the eyes of everyone, very publicly humiliated. It hurt to know that her husband did not trust her. Don't you know that pulled at her gut? Don't you know that was an arrow straight through her heart? Well, if it feels like an arrow straight through your heart, it's a test. It's a trial. And will you be vindicated? Will you be faithful? Will you keep your eyes toward the future? Or are you guilty? Or have you been faithless? Both zeal and jealousy are very high emotional, energy-producing states. But when we handle the holy things, like the sacred name, or when we handle holy things, the Torah in our lives, just like the articles, we have a responsibility to keep our emotions in check, to respect the boundaries of obedience. Remember Nadav and Abihu? They died before the Lord when they offered strange fire. It was not their job to offer the fire, the incense. It was Aharon's job, their father's. They did not respect that boundary. They said, we will worship the Lord. We will do our service. And they took from him his authority and tried to go in his place, and they died before the Lord. They died worshiping. Just like Uzzah, he died in an attitude of worship. We can die in an attitude of worship if we are not obedient according to what we know. Let's not die before the Lord. Torah does not call us to live a life of boredom or coldness. He doesn't want you to be cold and just have everything, like the British, stiff upper lip old man and all that. That's not what he called you to do. He did call you to praise and to worship and to dance and to sing and to teach and to preach the word wherever you went. But he called you to do it in obedience to everything you know up to now. Or you will die before the Lord. You will die doing the right thing. You think. It's just like that threshing floor of Nachon. What was right, true, and established. When you start threshing wheat, what happens? The chaff, the fluffy stuff, it sails off and it's going to die. And there's no reproduction from the chaff. But the grain, it's going to get beaten half to death in this threshing process. But even its death is its vindication, because when it goes in the ground and dies, it brings forth many times more fruit. So in your trial, in your test, in your threshing, the question is, when you bury that part of your carnally minded, controlled flesh, will new birth, will new growth spring out of it? Your trial can be your vindication. Let it be your vindication. If you're still depending on these oxen of undisciplined emotions to guide where the Torah goes in your life, you're going to stumble and you're going to fall, and somebody might die before the Lord. It should be a living thing, always in balance on your shoulder. So what do we say about our own trial? You don't have to drink the bitter water. No one could force that woman to drink it. She didn't have to go. But if she wanted the test, if she wanted her relationship with her husband to ever progress past the point where it was, if she wanted the relationship to grow, she had better drink it. If she were innocent. If you don't drink the bitter water of a test, you will never grow. You will be stuck in your relationship both with the Father and other people right where you are. You'll never move past it. And you know what? That trial will keep coming around. We keep talking about going around the mountain again. The trial, you'll keep drinking the bitter water and drinking the bitter water and drinking the bitter water and saying, why don't I ever get something better to drink? Be faithful in the trial. Be faithful in the test. But do it with the knowledge of holy things, because you are handling the holy name with this Torah in your heart. When people look at you, you're a Levite. You're carrying it. Your behavior has to be exemplary. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be careful with the holy things. We don't want to look foolish in a very public way. So, is it fitting for the undisciplined emotion of our golden calves to lead the ark, to pull that ark? Is that what you want? Pulling the wagon, your undisciplined calves. Is it right that our selfish desires guide where that ark goes? Is that a right thing? Is it true? Is it nachon? What is right? What is nachon? Or is it right for you to carry that Torah in perfect balance with lots of help on your shoulders? Are you disciplined like a Levite? Can you take instructions? Can you do your assigned task? Can you cooperate with other people to move this thing through the wilderness? Because that's where we are. We're not in the promised land, in case you haven't checked lately. We're not there. They have their own trials at this moment. There's still some wandering going on there. Let's fix our wagons before they get fixed. Let's fix these wagons. Let's be partners. Let's put our shoulders together to the yoke of the Torah, because it's a much lighter load when you have help. Help is here. If we will accept that help and balance ourselves and balance the Word, control our emotions and our desires, then we will live and not die before the Lord.